I hope I'm audible now.
You are audible, yes.
Yeah. So, for example, there is this one object which has been interpreted in a particular way in the museum catalog, which is a published book that is available for sale in the museum counter. But when you see it in the gallery display says something else about the same object. Similarly, there are older editions of the museum catalog which were worked on by different scholars, and they have interpreted it in another way. So it's also these multiple levels which the information percolates down, that between the what is there in the gallery and what exists as a knowledge with the museum's knowledge base, or what exists in the catalog, there are a lot of differences. Similarly, there are errors when it is on the online database, when something is being put it in the online database. There are also errors which you will not encounter maybe when you see it physically in the gallery. So I think as a researcher, it also becomes important for us to trace those multiple levels through which this knowledge passes down. And we then start questioning as to what is happening in reality at the end of the museum. So, is this something that is not known to the authorities? Is this something that the public doesn't know? And if it is something that's put in a certain way in the catalog, then how do we make a change in the gallery display? So I also realize that this becomes a very complicated issue at the end of the day.
So I think the one solution to it again is visually arranging objects. See, there are no objects without parallels. That's something that I think every curator understands at some primary level, that whatever they have in their gallery is not unique. There will always be a parallel. It may be shorter in stature, it may be smaller, it may be less valuable, or it may be made out of a different material altogether, but there will always be a parallel. So the first thing to do is visually sorting things together. And that has become very easy. Now, when the museums were first being established in India in the 1950s, in the 1960s, when you have, all these collections coming to you from different people, from personal collections, and also from colonialists, and you're trying to create a gallery, it was a very different scenario. Now it's completely different. There is digital revolution. There is also something called digital heritage. And there are so many things that are already digitally available. So, like I said, it's always a very useful and a very fruitful exercise to engage in visually sorting things together. And curatorship and curating things is a constant exercise in research. There will never be a moment in your life working in a museum where you will find yourself completely satisfied with what you have on display and with the way you've displayed it. So museums and the way they curate stuff has to continuously change, not just according to what the object's requirements are, but also in accordance to what the public wants from the museum. Which is why you have so many exhibitions, which is why you have so many things going on in the museum at all times, and not all of them are related to each other. So, whilst curating things, if there are multiple narratives available for a particular object that is within your collection, it's always a very fruitful exercise to look up parallels. And things like this have become very, very easy now that we have things like Google Art and Culture, like the Google Lens itself, which can help you visually sort an image somewhere. And when you have those conflicting opinions, my suggestion to you as a researcher is first read all those narratives. Be extremely familiar with what each of those narratives says. So what does your catalog say? What does your register say? What does that official book written about that object says? And what do other people say about it? So what are other researchers' opinion about that particular object? Then try to visually locate your object. Then try to look into whether some work has been done on those other parallels that might give you an insight, or that might give you a direction as to what that object really was. What's very, very interesting is a lot of museums, British Museum, for example, even the Ashmolean Museum, for example, a lot of museums list a complete bibliography at the end of their object catalog. So when you open the catalog, you will also find about this object or further reading on this object. If you look up those further readings, especially when you have a parallel with you, things become even easier. Then you're like, okay, I have now conflicting opinions, but I also have multiple other opinions that I can base my thing on. And if you find that object biographies from here, there, and everywhere have left you even more confused about the object's original provenance, then by all means say so. Say so in your display, that this is an object that has had multiple interpretations. These are the multiple interpretations it has had. So while the real provenance of this object is unknown or it is difficult to fathom, this is the multiple level of interpretations that the object has received, and this is open to research and scholarly debate. Why can't, like I said, why can't we have that? Why can't we have a dialogue where we are inviting researchers as museum authorities to talk about what they know? And I can agree that you might not arrive at the correct answer at all. That's essentially the case with a lot of things in archaeology. You never arrive at the complete truth, but it's worth the quest. It's worth the investigation.
That's very true, ma'am. I absolutely agree. And as you said, I think the best way to do this is a visual analysis and, just by comparing parallels and having more objects taken into account, it does help in this kind of an analysis. So, we'll go to some of the questions from the audiences. So there is Vanshika who says, thank you for this wonderful talk, ma'am. We have discussed the implications of faulty provenance, but what are the implications of vague or incomplete provenance? Museums often have very limited information about some objects, which renders them useless for researchers. How can that be dealt with?
That's a very relevant question, Vanshika. Thank you so much for asking me that. And that's something I also wanted to address, but I didn't want to turn this talk into extremely long rant about why provenance is faulty and what it does to research. So how that can be dealt with is always head to the curator at the end of the day. I know there will be a lot of levels in some museums where they don't let you access the curator himself or herself directly, but always ask to see the curator, or always ask to at least send an email to the curator and say, can you please tell me more about this object? Here is this object in your display. Here is its picture. This is its accession number. Could you please tell me whatever you have about the object? Any accession records that you have, any literature that you have as a museum authority? Because museums don't just acquire objects randomly. It's not like shopping that you went one fine day, you went and you brought tomatoes and potatoes and everything, and you then put them on a display case. Museums, when they acquire something, they make you fill a complete form about what is this, and there's this complete accession record that the museum takes into consideration. This is not displayed, of course, but that doesn't mean it does not exist. So the museums have files and folders. Often, if you head into a museum's library, the records are generally out there. And if you have the permission to go and consult the librarian there, they will very happily assist you with it also. We've had to face this so many times. I worked very closely with Government Museum in Chandigarh on Speaking Archaeologically projects, and they've always been more than helpful. There's always this one person who will tell you, nahi, abhi madam nahi milengi. But once the madam actually meets you or you've sent them an email, they're very, very helpful. They'll direct you to the catalog, they'll direct you to the library, or they'll actually send you to the librarian and the librarian will assist you with it. So it's always worthwhile when you're working as a researcher. A little bit of legwork, a little bit of brain work, and a little bit of exercise is always healthy. So approach the authorities in the museum. Of course, you may come across cases still that have ambiguous provenance, because sometimes the museum also acquires stuff that has been looted and that was being sent somewhere illegally, and then the museum acquired it, or somebody in the government or the police acquired it and gave it to the museum. In which case, of course, the provenance will remain incomplete. And in that case, the object, unfortunately, does become unreadable. But when you're visually sorting such